Welcome in, everyone, to Flyover Footy, live streaming on Thursday. Thank you for joining us live. Thank you for joining us later. We appreciate you either way. I'm here with Stuart Holtgren, and it feels like it's been forever since him and I, or really any of us, were live streaming on a Thursday. I might have only been like 2 weeks, but we are extremely happy to be back previewing the Chicago Fire. Stu, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Everything is better after a win. This whole week's been cheery and, wake up with a pep in your step.
Yeah, if you can't be, I mean, I know the season's kind of been in the toilet a little bit for large portions, but if you can't be excited and happy after a 3-1, should be 3-0 win, I mean, when can you be,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And we're facing off against, a traditional rival city in Chicago this weekend. So, if that's got to get the blood pumping, and it's definitely got mine pumping.
Yeah, I talked to Brendan Weesey earlier this week for the Soccer and the Lou show on KTRS, and that was my point right there, is that St. Louis and Chicago in soccer are definitely far from one of the biggest rivalries. It could even be argued that we're shoehorning a rivalry in from a soccer kind of viewpoint. Like, we don't talk about Chicago as competitive to youth. We don't talk about Chicago as competitive to the state of Missouri. The only reason I would say that they're a big deal is because the actual city rivalries, St. Louis and Chicago, the other sports, obviously we as St. Louisans just typically, generally speaking, do not like Chicagoans, the people from Chicago, for their sports related stuff. So I'm happy to carry that over to St. Louis City. I'm happy to try and get this to be something. But, like we've talked about, Stu, in order for it to be something, you got to win matches.
And the last two games of Chicago were very unfortunate and forgettable matches. So let's move on from them with a win on Saturday.
I'm game. We've got folks rolling in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us. Phil, Miles, Winter, appreciate you guys. Hopefully the chat's a little lively tonight. Any questions you guys have, drop them in. We are absolutely willing to entertain those during, if we see them and they come up in the course of the conversation. But if not, then afterwards for sure. So promise we'll get everything answered as long as you drop them in the chat. Plenty to talk about on the show. Have not started the pod recording yet, but we've got a lot of news to get to from the week. We've got a academy to analyze briefly, but there really wasn't that much that's unknown that he talked about. But we are still in the middle of a transfer window. And I think that, to me, is the most exciting thing to really touch base on. Is we may have all of our pieces in place because we are just a week away from the transfer window closing. It closes on August 21st. So Thursday of next week. We're 1 week away from the recording of this. And as I analyze the outgoings, the incomings, it honestly, when you put them together, it's kind of obvious what has happened in this transfer window. And it is pretty vastly different from last year's window, if I do say so myself. And then obviously previewing the Chicago Fire. So plenty to talk about. Stu, anything you want to get off your chest before we actually start the pod recording?
Oh man, here's a big confession. I actually like the city of Chicago. I don't like their sports teams, but I always like an away trip or a visit to Chicago. Lots to do there.
Were you disappointed when the match was moved from Soldier Field to SeatGeek?
Oh, massively, because it is it's a pain in the to get out to Bridgeview. Just absolutely a nightmare to get all the way out there. Whereas the future South Louis Stadium is going to be incredible, absolutely incredible for away trips and just Chicago in general and MLS. Because, when those big metro area teams kind of swing big, like when New York City FC, they get their nice stadium, they're going to be destinations.
It's just a little bit off downtown, but it's got a great metro station stop, right?
Yeah. So it's part of an area that's been underdeveloped. What do they call it? The 73rd Ward or whatever district. So,
way more detailed than I have.
Oh yeah, it's a little bit south of I guess what you call the main downtown area. I guess it's all inside the South Loop. or
That's fair.
inside South Loop. So great metro stop. It'll be an easy
Much
way
better
to
than
get
SeatGeek.
from. Oh my gosh, yeah. SeatGeek is an hour and 20 minutes to get there by public transit, and about the same by Uber from what I'm seeing. And it'll be a lot quicker for the new stadium.
Goodness. Yeah, so question in the chat, Ryan Biles asked, where's Phil? Phil is taking some time for family, as we do at the end of the summer. Phil and Santi were hoping to get the full flyover crew back at some point here in the fall, but this summer's been crazy, man. I myself have been hit or miss much more often than usual. Part of it is, I would say, the mental load of it all. Just, 3 shows a week, 2 shows a week, depending on who you're talking to from flyover, is a lot as a, I would say, hobby, side hustle kind of a thing. And so it's been, it's definitely been a mental health summer for a lot of us here on flyover. And we thank you for sticking with us, because the episodes have been a little less regular. We still have our one episode a week for sure, one and Fallout on 99% of the weeks. But the midweek has suffered, I would say, and hoping to get back into a little bit of regularity with the school year starting, vacations ending, and all that stuff. So maybe this will coincide with a better performance from City, a fun stretch run that's we can maybe look back on this whole thing as starting with Nashville and carrying us forward. Because Santi and I were talking on X earlier about the Critchley conversation, which we're definitely going to touch on Critchley and him going into the rest of the season, odds of him keeping the job, what's going to take, etc. But he's 10 matches in, and he has a 1 point per game average, which is far below what you would expect from a full-time manager of this team. I mean, let's be honest with that. But it's also plenty of time left in the season, 9 matches left, so he has twice as many games, double the amount of games upcoming. That's plenty of time to do work. If he wins 7 out of 10 games, if he goes on that run, if he squeaks into the playoffs, that would put him at a points per game that for his entire tenure that may make you comfortable with that. But as I said on X earlier today, ultimately, you have to string together wins. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. You could honestly boil this entire episode down to, if Critchley doesn't perform and win against Chicago, then you reset the clock on his ability to keep this job. It starts simply with winning back-to-back matches. If you go through the entire tenure of Critchley, 19 games is what it's going to end up being, and he can't win back-to-back matches, I'm sorry, but as much as I like the guy, as much as the players like the guy, you can't sign a coach who can't win back-to-back matches with a seemingly ideal lineup that we are now rounding into form with. I'm sure there's some disagreement on the quality of Critch, but I really think it can boil down to that. And I hope to drop that in the pod, because I didn't really mean to go off this deep before we started recording. That's my bad. I know we're starting with news here in a second, Stu, so I couldn't help myself. Phil and I are not feuding. I promise you that. It's more like mom and dad are sharing duties with the kids, right? It's we all come into the house at the end of the day. We're all one big happy family, but we've got kiddo sports going on. We've got all these other different things, and so we're sharing the workload until we can both find time with our schedules to align here this fall, and it's going to happen. Hopefully sooner rather than later, because I miss talking to Phil too. I miss Phil running the show. Like, I don't know if you guys know, but I'm not the most comfortable person actually running these shows. Even if I do it on Fallout, it's a little bit easier for me for Fallout, but I much prefer to be the guy who gets it thrown to, as opposed to me throwing it to someone like Stu, even though he has the best takes.
Oh yeah, that's kind. But yeah, no, Phil was in that seat traditionally for quite a while at the history of the podcast.
Of course,
he stepped in admirably in his absence.
We do have split custody of Stu, by the way. That this is true. Yes, Stu visits
and Santi, yeah,
and Santi. Yes, I get weekends with Santi. That's my thing. Every weekend for Fallout. Yeah, so let's do it, Stu. Let's get going. we've got a lot of news to cover before we get into the preview of the Fire, and we have very short amount of time. I don't know if there'll be a wind down tonight, maybe after Stu heads off, because he's still got the littler ones running around or trying to sleep, that I might do a little wind down, but we'll see what happens depending on the questions we get. With that said, let's get going with the pod. Welcome everyone to Flyover Footy on the Big 550 KTRS. My name is Matt Baker, joined this week by my friend in soccer, Stuart Hultgren, for a big Flyover Footy to preview our arch rivals in many sports, though not yet soccer, but it may become one in soccer if we are also lucky, the Chicago Fire. St. Louis City faces the Chicago Fire this Saturday, 7:30 p.m. at SeatGeek Stadium. Not downtown Chicago as it was originally supposed to be at Soldier Field, but moved because of Chicago Bears preseason. If you want to know the hierarchy of sports in Chicago, that's all you need to know. Stu, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. I am getting ready for my early train trip up to Chicago on Saturday morning. So
Nice.
Looking forward to seeing that match and not looking forward to being in Bridgeview.
Away days are the best, even if they're in the burbs. And look at it kind of optimistically, I suppose, if you're making the trip up, that this is one of your last few years to be going up to Bridgeview. With Chicago getting a new stadium, Stu and I talked about it off air just before the recording. Your time going to Bridgeview is going to be few and far between in the future. And because they're still primarily at Soldier Field, you never know what you're going to get with MLS scheduling. This could be your last chance to go to Bridgeview. And who doesn't want to miss an opportunity to go to Bridgeview?
Absolutely. Add it to your deck of MLS stadiums that you visited before it's too late.
Before it's too late. I love it. All right. Well, before we get into the preview of Chicago Fire, we've got some news from this week to go over. So let's hit it really quick. Flowers given immediately to Jaziel Orozco, named to the MLS Team of the Match week for his performance last week. 1 goal against Nashville SC in the 3-1 victory. He's had a pretty complete offensive and defensive performance now over the past 5 games that he has started and competed in for St. Louis. So kudos to Jaziel. That was given after the Phil Insanti did fall out last week, so we had to address that, give that really quick. And that's going to play into our discussion on the starting 11 later. The fact that Orozco not just starting the last 5 games at center back, left back, and right back, if I have that correct, but also Team of the Match week, scoring a goal and helping to lead St. Louis City to victory. So fantastic for Jaziel. Congratulations on that. Next big story for this week is the St. Louis City Academy has announced their coaching staff for the upcoming 2025-2026 season. And if there are 2 stories that I have to take away from this, it is consistency and exciting new faces to the staff. Consistency in most every play. So the Academy director is still Dale Schilly. U18s are headed by Luis Swisher and assisted by Charlie Rankin. The U15s, Anthony Wallace, U15 assistant, Santiago Castillo. The U14 head coach is Kyle Reibeling. Sorry, I'm completely whiffing on that. Kyle Reibeling. Director of Player Pathway and the U14 assistant coach is Megan McCormick. Academy fitness coach Evan Shirkey. Academy fitness coach Preston Seacrest. Goalkeeper coach Michael Ritterbeck. Goalkeeper coach Mark Pye. IDP coach Sean Reynolds. A lot of familiar faces. And if you noticed, I skipped over the U16s entirely because that is the lead of this. As much as you want to bury the lead on the entire staff, the focus on this announcement is the U16s and the official announcement, rather, of the hiring of Mike Sorber. Stu, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about Mike Sorber. I'll give a quick intro of his history for those of you who are unfamiliar with them. Reading mostly from City's announcement, Sorber recently served as the assistant coach, technical director for Toronto FC, front office and coaching roles at LAFC, Montreal Impact, and the U.S. men's national team. Mike Sorber spent time as an assistant coach for his alma mater, St. Louis University, serving as the head coach of, as they call it, local club St. Louis Scott Gallagher's U17 side that made a run to the MLS Next quarterfinals this year. Started his professional career with Liga MX side UNAM, making 51 appearances before making 166 appearances in the first 4 seasons of MLS. He made 67 appearances for the U.S. men's national team, a member of the 1994 FIFA World Cup team, where I believe he started all 4 games that they played, and a St. Louis native. Stu, what else you got on Mike Sorber? Because this is honestly a big deal that he has come back and joined the City Academy as a coach of their U16 team.
Yeah, he was a kind of, he comes with a lot of uh, plaudits and praise for his time in previously in MLS with Toronto, but specifically, I think he got most of his recognition during his time as the director of soccer operations and assistant coach at LAFC when they first kicked off. So I think that's when he kind of reached the zenith of his front office career to this point. Um, and I think the expectations are high. I think Mike is recognized as a very good soccer mind. And I think as a St. Louis native, his academy experience is going to be especially valuable to this team going forward.
Couldn't agree more. And joining Mike Sorber is a familiar face for a lot of St. Louis City 2 fans. Larson Hackworth, former City 2 midfielder, joined Sorber's staff as a U16 assistant coach after playing 2 seasons with City 2 and appearing in 17 matches. The announcement really indicates he had a season-ending injury, and then Hackworth made the decision to work through the rest of his contract this season while rehabbing. Larson Hackworth, John Hackworth's son, Stu, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So that's the obvious family connection for those wondering. And Hackworth has accolades from UNC Asheville, Missouri State University, United Soccer Coaches Player of Distinction, and Big South All-Tournament team while at UNC Asheville. So there's our U16 team as well. Focus is going to be on the U16s quite a bit because of Mike Sorber. So pay attention to them as the upcoming season begins. After the academy, we had an interesting interview that was more or less found online of Roman Burki. A lot of you are familiar with this from the, I think it's the SPOX or SPOX outlet, where Burki talks at length about his time at Borussia Dortmund, talks about coming to the United States. And there are 2 pieces of this interview that I think are a little bit revealing in certain ways that make them slightly newsworthy to me. One of them is related to the overall how he sees football or soccer in the United States. And one of them is related to his City contract. But the first one, I think he talks about how game day, how match day is different from match day in Germany, in Europe, where he'd played before, talking about how people come first and then the athlete comes next. He says you're also proactively interested in how you're doing in private, and it's extremely helpful. The focus on match day is mostly at home until 2 hours before kickoff. He says, quote in the article as it's translated, "We always meet 2 hours before kickoff and already directly in the stadium. Everyone takes breakfast and lunch at home. Overall, this contributes to a certain serenity, but I've already observed that it can also increase the risk for some of them not taking everything so seriously." And there have been a lot of times in St. Louis, the St. Louis City's short history, where the locker room, I would say, has ebbed and flowed. So this is an interesting note on how match day in the United States with Major League Soccer differs from a match day in Europe, Germany, England, and how that can change the overall match day atmosphere, match day approach for some players. And Stu, talk to us for a second about how Burki's description, we always meet 2 hours before kickoff after having lunch and breakfast at home. How does that differ from some places that we know of in Europe?
Well, to my understanding, the way that it's at least done in Chelsea, from what I understand, is, and other Premier League and championship sides, is you spend the night with your team in a hotel the night before, then you'll take the bus to the stadium before the match on the day of the match. Even for home games, I believe Chelsea stay at the hotel on the campus right by Stamford Bridge and then go over. So yeah, different mindset. So you're definitely locked in, maybe you could say, but you can see how it's more relaxed, and you could see how someone who's coming from that environment to a more relaxed atmosphere may not respond quite as well as seriously, you might say.
That's a fair assessment, and I think it plays into the fact that we brought over so many internationals from Europe, and they have this different. They'll have a different mindset coming in here than maybe Americans have with MLS experience. That's part of the acclimation, right? That's part of making sure you can stay focused on match days with the different lead up to matches and just the aura around Major League Soccer teams. But the more interesting quote in this article to me is about his contract with St. Louis. After talking at length about BVB, Borussia Dortmund, his time there, how it ended, the article asks about his contract in St. Louis, which is stated to end at the end of 2025. We all know this. We know Roman Burki is in the middle of contract renegotiations, but he goes on to say, when asked, how much longer do you want to play? He says, as long as I feel good and the performance is right. Fortunately, I have no major physical complaints. The broken bone is nothing, by the way. I don't want to feel like I can't reach balls anymore because I've become too immobile or weak in reaction. We are in good contact with the club to find a solution, meaning St. Louis City. The interviewer goes on to ask, so is a continuation of your career in the USA most likely, or is a return to Europe possible? And Burki responds, rather not. I like it here very much. We are currently in contact with several clubs from the MLS, but since I feel very comfortable here, meaning St. Louis, and like the people very much, St. Louis is a priority. So he goes on to say that after his playing career, he wants to travel. He mentions his fiance is American. She wants to go to Europe, but he talks about his post-playing career being traveling. So I don't think the desire to go to Europe by his fiance has anything to do with his current state in playing, because he's very specific about St. Louis being the priority. He was also very clear that he is in conversations with his agent with other MLS clubs. I don't think that's a surprise, and it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone because as it was noted by our friend Mo of Mo Football, it is due diligence by an agent, by a player's agent, to be in contact with other clubs once a contract is expiring. If they were focused solely on St. Louis, yeah, as St. Louis fans, I would love that. I would love if it was St. Louis or retire. That would be fantastic, and I'd feel very flattered as a St. Louis City fan. But that's not the reality with Burki still wanting to play, not having a contract in place. The best thing for him and for his upcoming family, that's fine. There's nothing that I'm reading too into it about Burki being in contact with other clubs, because with St. Louis being his stated priority, the ball is very much in Lutz Pfannenstiel and Diego Gigliani's court to keep Roman Burki here. I don't know what that entails, what he's asking for, but it very much seems like Burki is putting St. Louis first and foremost in this, which you love to see. And ultimately, as we pivot in a minute to talk about the on-field action, that's where it's really going to, I think, make a difference, Stu, right? Like, Burki's not just going to stay here for the fun of it. He's always talked about competitiveness. We know that's in his heart. So if we don't put a good product on the field, he's not going to be more inclined to stay, I would think.
Yeah, it's a negotiation tactic also. If he has no offers or no interest from other MLS teams, we're going to offer him less, and he needs to put the pressure on the club to succeed. And we want players at the club to push the front office to bring in quality players, and fans, we're going to push him in the same way. So it's, we know he wants to win. And if he didn't want to win and he was content just sitting here and losing, then I wouldn't want him back on the team.
Well said. The last thing before we get into the preview of the Chicago Fire is a transfer window update. As I mentioned before we started recording, and I'll say it again now, the summer transfer window that opened on July 24th will close on August 21st. We are 7 days, depending on when you're seeing and viewing this, less than 7 days likely. By the time match day comes, we're going to be 5 days from the end of the transfer window. 1 week or less, and we are done with our movements until the offseason. So here's a recap really quick of the work that we've done. And Stu, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. And if I've missed anything because of my gallivanting in the past few weeks, then I'm sure I will be corrected in the chat. But pay attention to the outgoings versus the incomings, because I'm going to recap that in a second. See if you notice any trends as I say this. Outgoings, I would refer to this. Rasmus Alm, season-ending injury with his contract expiring at the end of this year, has an option for next, but he's done for this year. We moved him to the season-ending injury list. He's off our roster at the moment. Joachim Nilsson, contract buyout, first in club history. He was a TAM player under contract to the end of 2026, and I put his contract buyout at an estimated $2 million. That's how much we paid him outright for what was left of his contract. Jonas Horn allowed his loan to end, and he was then transferred from FC Nuremberg to Rapid Wien in the Austrian Bundesliga. Jabulu Blom was transferred to the Vietnamese champs that I'm not even going to attempt to say their name because I butchered it last time. Selmir Pedro loaned out again to finish out his contract, this time to Velez Mostar in Bosnia. He's gone. Knutby Thoresen, the loan was made permanent to Sparta Rotterdam in the Netherlands. So we have Alm, Nielsen, Horn, Blom, Pedro, and Thoresen. Those are the outgoings. Incomings, Falou Fall, a reported $3 million transfer fee paid from Norwegian club Fredrikstad FK. He's on a U22 contract, the most expensive defensive signing in club history through 2028 with a club option for 2029. Haziel Orozco signed from City 2. Contract goes through the end of this year with options for 26, 27, and 28. Songbin Jong, $1.6 million cash for trade deal, first cash for trade in club history, with a potential up to $400,000 in incentives potentially going to Minnesota United. He's under contract through 2025 with an option for 26, and he occupies a U22 slot. Devin Padelford, on loan only right now, and as he told me the other week, he has no plans to stay, expects that by the end of this season he goes back. So as we understand it, and per no mention of it in any press release, we don't believe there's a purchase option there. But that doesn't mean that we couldn't sign him. It doesn't mean that we can't negotiate something once his loan ends. It doesn't have to be a purchase option for us to keep him. That's just the obvious, easy way up front that you can negotiate that. So breaking these down, the fascinating thing to me is if you remember last offseason or last summer, it was bolstering everything. It was adding things along with replacing one outgoing like Nico Gioacchini. We finally replaced him with Cedric Toyshirt, and then we added Simon Betcher, Marcel Hartl, Jonas Horn. We bulked up our roster. We added players compared to what we had. This transfer window, if you compare those outgoings, or at least my phrasing of the outgoings, for Alm, Nielsen, Horn, Blom, Pedro, and Thorson, you kind of get more of replacements. You have Alm and Nielsen, two perennially injured players, never seeing consistency in the production, their availability, and they're removed from the roster. They're replaced. Alm can be viewed as replaced by Songbin, and Nielsen can be viewed as replaced by Falou Fall. And I mean, that's a pretty apt comparison as far as I'm concerned, in where they play on the field, some of their skills and strengths. And obviously, Falou Fall being a left-footed, left-side center back. I mean, it's. I think Lutz even mentioned this, that that's the exact profile that they were trying to replace and get and value on their team. Jonas Horn is sent out, seemingly replaced by Devin Padelford as that left-footed, left-sided defender, whether it's left back or a left wing back. Haziel Orozco is a player who excelled at City 2. We had a defensive need, and I honestly think this is one of the biggest and best surprises of our transfer window is comparing Haziel Orozco to some of our signings last year that were similarly needed. So we had Orozco signed because of injury and depth issues, not just on the fact that he earned it, but I compare him to guys like Johnny Klein, Michael Wenzel, and Jay Reed from last season, signed from City 2. And how many of them have seen time here recently? Johnny Klein wasn't re-signed. Michael Wenzel has been hurt all year and arguably would never see the field because of the depth we now have at center back. And Jay Reed has clearly fallen to third choice left back, at least behind Padelford and Orozco. So Orozco is a much, I would say, a much brighter signing from City 2 than we saw last year, with the potential to be a longer term. Now, don't want to speak too soon because we all thought that same thing about Jay Reed, and obviously that's not happening right now. But at the moment, Orozco looks like a great signing from City 2. And then you just had roster cleanup in Blom, Pedro, and Thor that we really never, at least with Blom and Pedro, we knew weren't coming back. And so now you move them on. Their contracts are finishing out. You know they're not going to be on the roster again. So with all this done, the roster now stands at 19 senior players and 10 supplemental, meaning we have one spot available to sign a player on the senior roster thanks to the Joachim Nielsen buyout. That was the last move made, if I recall correctly, and that sparked the discussion of why do that now, when will we replace him, and what's the long-term plan? So we have 7 or less days, depending on when you're listening to this, left in the transfer window. So the questions do turn to why now? Why, when, and how will Lutz replace him on the roster? He was a TAM level player at $1.25 million per year. So that's a significant chunk of money and roster spot off of the books. He was not an international player because he had his green card. So Lutz has a few days to do something, but at the very least, this gives him a ton more flexibility in the offseason if that's how he's approaching it. If he sees us as having our, what Critchley said on Thursday, 26 or so healthy players training, if that group and what we saw last week, plus returning Durkin and Vollum and Kessler, if that is viewed as depth enough for right now, and you don't want to force the issue by just bringing in, and I mean this in the nicest of ways, a Jean de Silva type player at the tail end of a transfer window, we know how that's turned out. We know how that's turning out. I would rather look in the winter, no extra roster slot, than force something just to have a roster slot taken up and depth added, because we've seen this story before. We've read this with Jean Da Silva. We've seen how it goes. Don't do that again. Stu, what are your thoughts on all this?
I think the summer window is generally going to be your premier window where you're going to get your, I guess, your European talent, you can say, if you exclude the Scandinavian countries whose seasons line up with MLS. So, spring to fall. So I think the general thought process is that we would have made more moves in this window, perhaps bringing in, a central defensive midfielder or another player of that caliber who can raise the team level for next year, bet him for the rest of the season. But I think we're kind of past that point, and I think they can find players of that caliber in the winter window.
Yeah.
So you talk about roster cleanup. To me, the big roster cleanup that's going to come is going to be that supplemental roster. So,
yes.
I mean, a lot of those guys are on options at the end of the season who have options for 2026 who won't be back. So, I mean, is it too harsh to say that a guy like Kyle Hiebert's already in the outgoing? I mean, he hasn't featured under Critchley in a while. So will he feature again? And I don't say that in a harsh way. And Kyle's been a great servant for the club since he signed in 2022 with City 2. Just he seems to be entirely out of the picture, and with his contract up, why?
Yeah. So, and not just that, but with all the contracts expiring and the unknowns, the various questions you have, you want as much flexibility as possible. We have a good amount of GAM that we've taken into the season, over $2 million of GAM as of May. Having an extra close to $700,000 or so in TAM that we saved from Joachim Nilsson, that's huge. So having all of these roster slots that we're probably going to need to fill, whether it's supplemental that don't hit the cap or it's senior that do, guys like Kyle Hiebert, and then being able to replace him or Nilsson's spot or whoever else it might be, maybe we still have an outgoing left to do this transfer window. There have been a few rumors like that. A couple Brazilians that we've heard about, various rumors. Klaus that was kiboshed, but has apparently been rekindled by STL FanVan on social media that is hearing that he might be still an option to sell, but there's no validity that I've heard to that or no official reports. Kudos if he gets it right, but Celio Pompeo has also been talking in interviews about having fielded offers from other clubs. So there could still be movements, and more flexibility from a guy like Nilsson's buyout is going to be better, whether it's this window or the offseason. So when I'm asked, does Nilsson's buyout mean that we're going to sign a player this window? No, it absolutely does not. The fact that we have all of these healthy players we're going to talk about here in just a minute with our preview, that tells me that this club may have what they want for this season, and they aren't going to force the question like they did at the end of last transfer window. And that's not a bad thing to me, especially when we talk about the depth that we have now. We'll talk about it in just a minute. But with that, you are listening to Flyover Footy on the Big 550 KTRS. Thank you so much for joining us on a preview of this weekend's match, which we're getting to right now. Let's look at the Chicago Fire and St. Louis City going into this weekend. And let's start with looking at the history, which is very short, and a reason why we talk about St. Louis and Chicago having the history and the rivalry as opposed to St. Louis City and the Chicago Fire. These two teams have only played each other 3 times by my count, with the Fire having won 2 of them. Back in 2023, I think we all remember the Fire stopping St. Louis City cold in our tracks as one of the first big hiccups of 2023. A 2-1 dumping of us in the Open Cup, and then a 1-0 victory just 4 days later, as I read it, in MLS play. That was a bad week. That was a rough week. After that, St. Louis did come back to defeat the Chicago Fire May 11th, 2024. So let's hope to even the overall rivalry, the overall series between these two clubs. Alm and Klaus scored in that last game. Klaus had a brace, so I wouldn't mind another Klaus brace or even a hat trick for his second of his career. But these two teams are in I would say, fairly similar places in the standings. Neither are world beaters, but the Fire are definitely in a better place going into the last 9 games of the season. The Chicago Fire stand in 9th place in the Eastern Conference with a 10-9-6 record, 10 wins, 9 losses, 6 draws, with 36 points in 25 matches. They have 47 goals scored, 42 goals against, and that's a +5 goal differential. They have a 3-4-5 home record, which is worse somehow than their 7-5-1 away record. Very unicornish in Major League Soccer. Only 1 loss at home, and their last 2 away games were losses. So this is an interesting team from their recent history and how they've performed this season. In their last 3 matches, a 2-2 draw against LAFC last weekend, a 1-0 win against the Red Bulls before that, and a 2-0 win against Montreal at Montreal before that. They have not been shut out since June 25th against the Philadelphia Union, a 1-0 loss. They have only been held to 4 clean sheets, again, in general, out of 25 matches. So this is a team that doesn't get shut out. But on the opposite side, they've also only had 4 clean sheets kept themselves. 2 of them have been draws, and 2 of them have been in their last 3 matches, that Red Bulls and Montreal, CF Montreal game. So very much a goal-scoring team, very much a goals-allowed team. If you're looking to predict scoring, you're playing with fire if you're going to predict a 0 on either side for this one. Their health and availability, basically what you need to know is Chris Miller was placed on season-ending injury list, and his spot on the roster was just taken up by the new acquisition, Andre Franco. That's kind of where the big stories end. Last week, they had Romani Kouame with a lower body injury. They had David Poreba with a lower body injury, and Sam Rogers, again, lower body injury. All 4 of those players were out, but it's really Chris Miller on season-ending injury, replaced now by Andre Franco, who we're going to talk about in just a minute. Some of the big storylines that I'm following for Chicago, their own push to the playoffs. The Fire have pushed their way into a tie for 9th place with the New York Red Bulls and are 8 points clear of 11th place New England Revolution. So they are comfortably in that fighting against 1 or 2 teams. The Revs are 11 points. The Revs are 8 points behind the Fire and the Red Bulls, and every point is going to count for the Chicago Fire team. They're going to be desperate to get at least a point, if not all 3, in their fight for the playoffs. It's likely going to be a head-to-head battle against both New York teams, as New York City FC sits just 2 points ahead of the Fire and the Red Bulls in 8th place. The Fire have not made the playoffs since 2017. This is a team desperate to get back to relevancy in MLS, and the big name behind that push for relevancy, you're all familiar with it, is Greg Berhalter, former U.S. men's national team coach. And all the articles you read, all the commentary, he has reinvigorated the Fire since being hired at the end of last season. The Fire are they're at least acting like a bigger spending team since the new ownership took over, since the push for the stadium. They're trying to turn around just about every single thing about their organization here from the last few years. We've heard rumors this year that the Fire have been interested in guys like Kevin De Bruyne, Neymar. De Bruyne seems like he might have some legs to those rumors, but Wednesday of this week, Tom Bogert reported the latest signing that we just mentioned, Andres Franco from Porto in Portugal, a loan with a purchase option. This is a TAM/borderline DP caliber player, 27-year-old attacking midfielder, and he joins a pretty robust attacking group of players right now. 2 attacking players from Chicago have double-digit goals scored this year. Hugo Kuipers, a Belgian 28-year-old DP with 14 goals and 1 assist, and Philip Zinkernagel, a Danish 30-year-old TAM player with 10 goals and 9 assists, who more operates as an attacking winger in a 4-3-3 that they run, but also drops in to link up play as well. That's where he gets his 9 assists from a lot. They've got a couple other attackers and a couple other dangerous players. Jonathan Bamba, 4 goals and 4 assists, is their other designated player. They have a U22 roster construction model with Leonardo Barrosa, DJ Davia, newly acquired this window, and I don't think he's seen time yet with the Fire. Brian Gutierrez, their homegrown, 7 goals and 1 assist from him, and Giorgio Kucias as their U22. Kucias is on loan, so he's not going to be available, obviously, in this game. But also, the other player I want to point out is Andrew Gutman, their left back. They signed him just a couple of years ago, and I remember him well because at the time, St. Louis ourselves were searching for a left back right before I think we signed Nicholas Dewar, if you remember that name. Andrew Gutman was signed from the Colorado Rapids. He was acquired from them ahead of the 24 season, and now seems like he has cemented himself as the left back of choice, not just for the Fire, but amongst the best in Major League Soccer. Stu, what do you make of this Chicago Fire team with either the players or anything else that you know about them?
Well, you didn't even mention their biggest star, Tom Barlow.
I was waiting for you. You're the local dude.
Yeah, Tom Barlow, who is from St. Louis, MLS striker for Chicago Fire, had a hat trick earlier this season. So he sits at 3 goals. I think he's their joint 6th goal scorer, leading goal scorer, something like that.
Yep.
No, they have a very exciting and loaded attack. So it should be interesting to see for a few ways how they implement Andre Franco when he comes in. And it's funny you talk about Neymar and Kevin De Bruyne. De Bruyne having legs. That was, I don't know if that was a pun or not, given their fitness levels.
Yeah, the injury, yes.
Exactly. Andrew Goodman, though, he is familiar with St. Louis. He won a Herman Trophy or Herman Award as the best NCAA men's player in 2019, I think.
Good callback.
So that is given in St. Louis. Well, I have to throw it out there because I was there and shook his hand and got my little photo op with him. But
humble brag.
No, super nice guy. And I know there are some folks around St. Louis who are big into metrics, who are big on Andrew Goodman. So he's an impressive player. He'll be whoever a right back is at this match. It'll be interesting to see how they line up against him. But very, very interesting attack. So good battles, good tests for Falou Fall.
And on the St. Louis side, we know that we're still 14th in the West. We have a 5-14-6 record, 21 points in 25 matches, a 27 goals scored, 41 goals against, minus 14 goal differential. It has been a Herculean task to come out from the abyss that we were under Olaf Melberg, and it's been stop and start under David Critchley. From a results perspective, at least, we are now 10 games into the Critchley era. 3-6-1 is our record under Critchley. 3 wins, 6 losses, and a draw. The last 3 MLS matches, a 3-1 win against Nashville at home last weekend that we are still riding the high from, needing to see that back-to-back created, a 2-1 loss against Minnesota at home, and a 3-0 loss against Dallas. Some really, a really poor performance, especially against Dallas there, that was on the backs of another win. We are now 5 points clear of the Galaxy, though, for the Wooden Spoon. So that had been a heated conversation topic over the past few weeks before that Nashville win. Also, we are now ahead of Montreal and DC United by 2 points. And we trail Toronto FC and Atlanta United by just 1 point. So we've got a very tight cluster of teams here in the bottom of 5 of 6. I would put St. Louis, Montreal, DC, Toronto, and Atlanta in that tight cluster. But with St. Louis on our side, we you know the storylines that we're following here. It's the continued integration of Falou Fall, it's Songbin Jong, Devin Padelford, and Haziel Orozco. There's a sub-series of questions here, such as where is Thomas Totland? When will Henry Kessler reappear on the roster, given our performance last week? The performance of Klaus is a massive story to follow under David Critchley, and it will continue to be until he gives us a reason to not talk about it. With a goal last week against Nashville, the stats that I pulled, Klaus has now tied his career best in a City jersey. He's got 10 goals on the season in all competitions, guys. It's snuck up on us, I think, that Klaus is now at double-digit goals in all competitions, a goal-scoring record or level that he matched in matches 2023, where I think he had all those in MLS play. So we're still going to track that number, just MLS goals, where he only has 8 after he had 2 in the U.S. Open Cup in a couple matches. He is the only player, and I mean, this kind of sounds silly, but I think it's still noteworthy to the importance of Klaus on his goal scoring, not just his link-up play, his hold-up play, facilitation, and stuff. He's the only player so far in St. Louis City history in 3 years to score double-digit goals in all comps in multiple seasons. He has 7 goals in his last 10 matches. So of his 10 overall this season in all comps, 7 have come in the last 10, all under David Critchley. And this is only the 3rd time in Klaus's career that he scored 7 or more goals in a 10-match stretch. The last time it happened was 2020 for Lask in the Austrian Bundesliga and the Europa League. Those 2 competitions led to that 7 goals in 10 games. And before that, it was the year before, 2019 in Finland when he played. So this is a hot Klaus, and is the hottest Klaus that we've ever seen in a St. Louis City uniform. That's the level we're seeing from our striker. And it is fueling some of those rumors or speculations of teams being interested and Klaus potentially being sold. But the last report that we had is that Klaus was deemed too important to St. Louis City SC to let him go. That was when the rumors were that he was going to Club Leon, I believe it was, a couple weeks ago. So with the quote unquote new rumors of people still being interested in him, doesn't surprise me that people are interested in Klaus. They would surprise me if people weren't, given his current form and his impact to St. Louis. The other story that I'm following is the ascension of sorts, finally, of Tomas Ostrak, a player who we've talked about ad nauseum. I've got multiple interviews with the guy up on our Flyover Footy YouTube page because he is just such a fun person to talk to. And his journey from City 2 in 2022, when he was one of the original signings, the stops and starts, the injuries, the trying to find his right position, trying to find consistency, he's now become a Critchley guy that, bar none, he is forcing himself into the equation of starting 11s from the central midfield, where it was deemed that we had a need, and he has just overperformed expectations at that level. Now back up into his attacking midfield role, and still able to slide back down to bolster our midfield in more of a 4-3-3. The flexibility, the tactical brilliance, the on the ball movement, the skill with the ball, and not just dribbling, but being able to beat guys and force misses. All of this is Tomas Ostrak's bringing. He's in the best shape, the best form of his City career. And it comes at a time where he's fighting for minutes alongside everybody else. We have the healthiest roster we have had all season long. And that leads to what St. Louis's player availability will be into this weekend, where Chris Durkin and Conrad Wallem are returning from suspensions. They're going to be available. The only players who we expect to be on this injury report, unless something else happens on Friday, which I'm knocking on any wood I can around here, given our Friday injury history, are Michael Wenzel and Cedric Teuchert. Wenzel, we fully expect to be out. Cedric Teuchert is, quote, being managed day to day. Though he wasn't at training on Thursday, his status to me is very much doubtful at best. And Critchley said in his Thursday press conference, quote, "We don't want to put him in a situation where the injury becomes more severe." End quote. He also notes that he's been training solo in the gym, ensuring he doesn't lose his fitness while his injury recovers. Beyond that, the only other noteworthy person to me is Mackay Joyner. Mackay Joyner had his 6th and final appearance via short-term loan last weekend against Nashville when he subbed on. He is now unavailable for the remainder of the season to appear in any MLS match unless his roster designation as an off-roster homegrown is changed. City, we've talked about this designation over multiple episodes. City would need to open up a roster spot on their supplemental roster in order to place Joyner there and allow him to appear again for City this season. And yes, the supplemental roster, because that's where homegrowns go. You don't place a homegrown on your senior roster. You could move a player from the supplemental up to the senior roster. So Lutz talked the other week about getting kind of, I would say, creative, I think was the word he used with the roster. There could be a scenario out there where you take Josh Yarrow, who is currently on our supplemental roster and is the highest paid player, you move him to the senior roster to fill that last spot that was vacated by Joachim Nilsson, and that's your supplemental slot right there for Mackay Joyner. That could happen, and that could be the final move that City makes in their transfer window if they wanted to give Mackay Joyner more opportunities at the MLS level. So that's my speculation for what could happen if we don't bring up any signings, because there's very few downsides to me to doing that. You leave open a senior roster slot for no other reason. Josh Yarrow is not on a big salary. I don't have it in front of me, but I think it's 150 to 200,000 maybe. That's not a big deal, and it's not going to hurt our cap. So you fill that slot with a Josh Yarrow, and you give Mackay Joyner this supplemental roster. Once you move a player from the off-roster homegrown to the supplemental roster, you can't move him back, but there's no desire. Once Mackay Joyner has reached that level, and I think he has, and I think a lot of people know he has, you don't need to move him back to the off-roster homegrown. He's going to be here. He's going to be here to stay, and he's going to push the envelope to play into next year and beyond. Stu, thoughts on not just Joyner, but anybody here from City?
Well, I mean, that's a more creative roster move than I would have thought of. My first one is we're allowed 2 buyouts, so buying out one of those supplementary roster guys if they're not going to appear. But I think moving one to the senior roster, I mean, it's very creative, very interesting. I like that. Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of the creativity of Joyner being on the squad full time, but do you want to keep him with City too for a little bit? And they're making their amazing push.
Yeah, I don't think this precludes that though, because just because you move him up to City, you give the opportunity to play for City. While we've got other guys like Durkin and Wallen played for City too last week. Zelensky plays for him regularly now, so that option's still there, and you could primarily use him there.
I think doing something would be better than doing nothing, just from a fan perspective of you like movement, you like excitement, and if it's not acquiring Joyner per se as a new player, but you're adding him to your roster as a full-time player. Yeah. I mean, I could get behind that as the last move of the season, assuming that, obviously the winter window is going to be pretty crazy for a bunch of ways. And we didn't even talk about Kessler's upcoming option and what's going to happen with Kess. But I think that's a time for another podcast.
That's true. You are listening to us on the Big 550 KTRS. We are Flyover Footy. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're going to skip a decent amount of the Chicago Fire specific, the tactical analysis, the details on some stats, because we are running very low on time here. So tune into our wind down, where I will go all in on the Chicago Fire for a brief amount of time, because I could probably talk for days on the analysis about the Chicago Fire, analyzing their how they attack, what their formations are, some metrics behind them. But I want to get into some really good stuff about St. Louis City right before we get into our starting 11 and our predictions. I want to talk about David Critchley for a second, Stu. I want to talk about what the importance is of the Chicago Fire match to David Critchley and his potentiality at winning and keeping this St. Louis City job. I said it on social media that, to me, David Critchley doesn't stand a chance to remain the St. Louis City head coach into 2026 if he can't win back-to-back games. That is the next milestone that he needs to reach in order to be in contention, seriously in contention, to put himself into that conversation. He is currently the interim manager for the rest of the season. Lutz already gave him that tag. The team changed his reference from caretaker to interim, said that Critchley is keeping the job for the end of the season while they look for a replacement, and he's now in contention. Lutz said that weeks ago. But Hackworth did win back-to-back games there at the end. I think it was Minnesota and SKC. I know SKC was one of them.
Yeah, San Jose and SKC.
San Jose and SKC, yes. So Hackworth did have back-to-back, but at the same time, Hackworth had a cumulative 1.38 points per game, and that's taking MLS and Leagues Cup play into consideration. And 1.38 will probably get you 8th or 9th place into the playoffs, maybe 7th on a good year, but it won't get you more than that. And so what I need to see from Critchley is multiple winning streaks, ideally, but definitely at least one. He's got to start shifting this points per game conversation to a sustainable level where you could replicate this over the course of a season and improve upon it, obviously, but you'd be safely in the playoffs. And he's got very few games left to work. But what are your thoughts on what you need to see from Critchley in this game against the Chicago Fire, especially, but in general, for him to put himself better into that conversation?
Well, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head right there. We have to see a sustained streak of success, because his points per game is still not at a position that we would be a playoff team. I think we're definitely a more entertaining side than we were under Olaf. And as a fan, that's great. But the season was already basically lost when Critch took over. So he's being judged a little bit differently for that aspect. But now that we're getting toward the end of the season and we're looking toward next season and the coaching, yeah, I mean, we need to see, if he can put up a 1.6 point per game or something, if we win 5 in a row or 3 in a row or whatever. You said earlier win, 7 out of 8. I think 7 out of 8 doesn't necessarily even get us in the playoffs at this point. So, but how incredible would that be? I mean, if we make the playoffs and we win 7 out of 8 to end the season, I think he absolutely gets the job permanently.
Agreed.
But, it's a risk reward thing. I mean, is he going to go to another team next year and be an assistant on someone's staff and take over in 2 years of some other MLS side? I mean, certainly I would expect him to be an assistant of whoever gets hired if he's willing to stay on in that role.
I couldn't agree more with that. And I think that has not been discussed enough, is that Critchley is at the very least putting himself in contention to be on a staff, notably City staff, with his knowledge of now MLS play, but also the style that St. Louis wants to play. Like, if you're talking about MLS managers with MLS experience, it becomes less of a need to have MLS experience if you got a guy, in my opinion, like David Critchley now, who has interimed a team for 19 games when all is said and done and knows the system front and back. Like, that is the exact kind of assistant you want to have if you don't have MLS experience. So that could be an angle that Lutz and Diego are looking at in their search. But the other thing besides stringing together a win is the opportunity Critchley now has with a healthy City team, the healthiest lineup available since taking over. The conversation to me now shifts more directly to Critchley's management of the game day roster and the tactics overall in the game, both to begin with and in the second half, with substitutions and adjustments. There was something said about Olaf Melberg that he didn't really get the opportunity to find a fully healthy team for a consistent period of time. Not unlike Bradley Carnell in the summer of 2024, he didn't get a chance to experience the club with the new signings that Hackworth had the benefit of taking over. So Critchley now has that benefit. He has the healthy lineup. He has overall a lot, Cedric Toyshirt notwithstanding, he has everybody that Lutz has brought onto this club available at his disposal. So what he does with the match day roster, what he does with his management of the game is a better and more true test of his potential as a manager going forward. Who he chooses in the 11, who he chooses on the match day roster itself is going to tell us a lot and should be looked to now as a more direct evaluation to me of him as MLS manager. Between options in the attack, between our depth at central midfield, these are going to be fascinating decisions because we're going to see names missing from this match day roster that only allows 20 players that are going to be a little head scratching at face value because we're used to seeing them as mainstays on the roster. We've already seen matches where we're missing Josh Yarrow and Akil Watts just because of volume. We're going to see matches where we're missing Kyle Hebert just because we have Falou Fall, Henry Kessler, Timo Baumgartel, Haziel Orozco, Devin Padelford, on and on and on. You know, those kinds of players are going to start falling off of the match day roster. And players, like you said earlier with Kyle Hebert, that we haven't seen under David Critchley. We haven't seen except in Aston Villa friendlies and more emergency type situations where injuries did play a factor. This is going to be the best opportunity we've had to judge David Critchley. And I think that's an exciting thing, not just the players available, but what he does with them. So that's one of the things I'm watching in Critchley, and who's going to be a healthy scratch with the decisions that he has to make. Do you agree? Do you think this is probably the biggest and best opportunity that Critchley could have and want at this stage?
I mean, yeah, if he can win and beat two very offensively potent sides and show that we know that we get a lot of XG under David Critchley, but we also, allow a lot of XG, or XGA is high as well. So if he can show that he's making defensive progress while we stay offensively potent against a team like the Fire, I think that's absolutely a fantastic opportunity for him.
And the last question I'm just going to leave for you, Stu. Do you think Falou Fall is going to be as effective against the likes of Kuipers and Sinkernagel as he was against Hani Mukhtar?
Oh, man. I'm going to say yes, because Falou Fall was really impressive. Jeremy Clement made I think it was a gif of that triple slide tackle that Falou Fall made against Mukhtar, and against him getting bodied by Falou Fall as well. And those were just amazing, and just looking forward to seeing more of that on Saturday.
I think the excitement for Falou Fall has been not astronomical, but it's definitely been one of the highest things of this week, even after goals by Orozco and Klaus and Songbin. You've got Falou Fall kind of stealing the limelight on the city socials there for a bit, and his individual work and the highlight reel tackles and footwork on Hani Mukhtar, the back heel pass, all of these way overshadows any errant passes that, in my opinion, more have to do with timing and familiarity of your teammates than anything else. The quality is so obviously there. We've talked about it for weeks now, since Falou Fall has been rumored and reported and signed and then appeared against Aston Villa after just a day of training. He's only had 2 weeks and change in training with City. So it's only going to get better with the timing that he has, the expectations he has for this team in some of those long progressive passes that we know are still going to come and still be a focal point of our backline attack as we lead it out from the back. But his left-footed left center back role, I think that we always envisioned Joachim Nilsson being that mainstay. And that's why I referenced Flufall for Joachim Nilsson as the replacement player going forward for our future now. That's absolutely going to be something to watch for. Can he shut down the best that the Fire have to offer, just like he shut down the best that Nashville SC has to offer? Because no goals in the run of play and really being shut down for Sam Surridge and Hani Mukhtar, that's something to hang your hat on in your MLS debut. Flufall, absolutely a person to watch for. And that leads us into our starting 11. So Stu, as we wrap up this show, which we've already gone long for KTRS, give me your starting 11. I'm going to put you on the spot and have you go first.
This is going to be hard. We went back and forth on this off air and just what we were going to choose. I'm going to just say I liked what I saw against Nashville. I think the one player who is most likely to be dropped is one who you can't drop after his performance last week. So I'm going to go with Burki, Padelford, Fall, Baumgartel, Orozco, who I think may be dropped if Wallum or Totland are present. Morales, Leuven, Hartl, Ostrak, Songbin, and
you were pretty close. And I think we've got the same mindset that how much can you change even with a more healthy, more available roster, namely Durkin, Kessler, and Wallum? How much do you really want to change after that performance? Arguably the most complete performance that you've had offensively and defensively together in the run of play, at least from Critchley's side. And I've got Burki in net, Padelford, Fall, Baumgartel, and Orozco as my back line, Chris Durkin and Edu Leuven as my central midfield. And then left to right, Marcel Hartl, Thomas Ostrak, and Songbin Jong as my attacking midfielders with Klaus up top. Other players of note you could make arguments for. Henry Kessler. At some point, you have to put Kessler back in the starting 11. Is this the match where he's fit enough to do it, but we're off of that defensive performance where, Nashville had high XG, but our defenders shut them down. They didn't allow them to score goals, which is what matters. Thomas Totland, I talked about him earlier. He's at some point got to return to the field. Are we saying that he's maybe losing his spot in his hold in the starting 11? Is it more than just the fatigue that he had at the end of last season? Is it more than that Toy Shirt's dealing with? Conrad Wallum, he's on loan for this year. He's only got a few more matches left for us, presumably. So can you keep him out of the starting 11, even if you have this really desire to keep consistency from a team that performed well against Nashville? Toy Shirt's probably going to be out, but all of these players have been presumed starters at one point this year. So now that we're coming off a convincing win, a team of the match day performance by Orozco, another stellar game by Ostrak, this time in the attacking midfield, and you saw his flexibility and versatility to drop back when we needed to bolster that midfield. The continued good performances by Padelford and Songbin. I don't know how you move these players out unless Critchley has a very specific tactical reason. Unless he's making a move to maybe sit Orozco because of a tactical advantage that he believes that a Totland or a Wallum can make at that right back side, or even with Padelford. At this point, if you're going to make a change, and I made a change of Durkin over Morales because I like Chris Durkin. I think he's a better fit with Edu Leuven. I like how they operate off of each other, and maybe he has more, I don't know, legs to withstand 70, 80 minutes at this point than Alfredo Morales. But you can make an argument either way. Morales did fantastic last week with Edu Leuven. But if you're going to make a change, my point is you're probably going to see a change made for a tactical reason. So if you see something different from last week, we're going to have to ask ourselves, where is that change? And maybe what does Chicago look like? And what are we expecting from Chicago that would necessitate this kind of a change? And that leads me to my last plug of tune into our wind down on our podcast, where I'm going to go over some of those potentialities and the attacking and the strengths and weaknesses of the Chicago Fire for our KTRS listeners. So we're going to end this show on Flyover Footy with our previous Chicago Fire with a scoreline prediction, and then we're going to get out of here. Stu, what is that scoreline prediction for you?
Oh, I'm going to go full optimist and say 2-1.
Full optimist. I like it. It includes no zeros, which I said earlier was a bad bet, so I appreciate that. I don't know. I think I'll go full optimist, but extra goal scores and say 3-2 City. Why not? I've been underplaying the goals scored by City lately, and it's been biting me in the charity challenge. That's why I've been wrong all season long as far as optimistic under Melberg, getting pessimistic under Critchley. So I'm going back, optimism. We're going to get that second win in a row for Critchley, and we're going to keep the party going. So for Stuart Holgren, my name is Matt Baker. Thank you so much for joining us on Flyover Footy on the Big 550 KTRS. Enjoy the game against the Chicago Fire, and we'll talk to you later. All right, Stu, you got to go? All right.
Yep. Always a pleasure. That was
Likewise.
fun. And I'm excited to see everyone up in Chicago who's going up there this weekend. I'll hopefully be there around by 6 o'clock. I don't know.
Safe.
Got to figure that out. Time it so I'm not showing up at 7:30.
Safe travels.
Yep.
Talk to you later.
Bye.
All right, little less of a wind down because it's tougher for one person to do a wind down of typical relaxation that we usually do. So I'm gonna get us back into this, and we're fire some of their tendencies, styles of play, all that stuff. Might not take long, but I felt like the conversation we had on the KTRS part was just a little better than the in-depth analysis on the Fire. So hopefully you guys are okay with that that flow. And if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. I'm still paying attention to it. I appreciate the love you're showing us. And then we'll get to those when I finish this. Oh, I should get a drink because I've got to do the thing. Fridge basements for the win. See, this is how long I haven't hosted a Flyover Footy on Thursday, it feels like. Welcome back to the wind down. Less of a wind down than usual wind downs because I don't have anybody else to banter off of. But as I promised in the first part of the show, a little bit more about the Chicago Fire on this wind down. So we know that Greg Berhalter is the head coach of the Chicago Fire. We know what he had style-wise with the U.S. men's national team, attacking, possession-based game. He's quick on his attacks, short passing, movements off the ball. They're going to be working to try and break our press very well from what they've done on some teams. They've been on a pretty record-setting goal-scoring pace. Second highest single season total is what they're on pace for at this point. They've got Hugo Kuipers. They've got Zinkernagel, both with double-digit goals. This is a dangerous team. This is a team that is scoring a lot, but they're also allowing a lot of goals. They like their high-tempo style. They do create overloads in the wide areas, and this is going to be probably my thing to watch, not to get you to turn this off right away, but if you have one takeaway from this, it's probably exactly what David Critchley had to say in his press conference on Thursday, that unlike Nashville operating centrally and needing to clog up that area, like what you saw in the second half where City moved a little bit to a 4-3-3, dropping Ostrak back, this game could be played on the wings. And this could impact some of our starting 11 choices. 1v1 defenders in space, prioritizing that potentially, making sure that they can't get in deep behind our lines, and just making sure that we control the wide areas better. They've got Brian Gutierrez in the central areas, who's probably going to be really well at connecting some of these lines from the midfield. But these wide areas are where you're going to want to watch. Berhalter has implemented kind of a high press system to win the ball back in some of those advanced areas. It uses some of his attacking players and their athleticism, like Kuipers and Zinkernagel. They are not unlike a Klaus and Hartl in how much they can and will press you and even press the goalkeeper. So Roman Burki could end up with some balls at his feet and some moments where he's playing the ball around some of the players or drawing defenders or drawing attackers really to him in goal. This has been prevalent in some of Chicago's recent wins. They won 3-1 against Vancouver, similarly with that high pressing style. Berhalter also likes to use his front three and his attacking midfielders for some really interesting positional interchanges. So you'll see some of the players like Zinkernagel and Bamba drift off into these wide areas. They will be very versatile in their movements. So the fluidity in the attacking third is a hallmark of Berhalter's Chicago Fire team. They adapt to different defensive setups. They leave gaps in the midfield sometimes. So I think that's why Critchley was very harping on the wide areas. So it will be interesting to see. We expect fully for St. Louis to come out in a 4-2-3-1. Critchley has re-emphasized multiple times that's his formation. It seems like when we're talking about tactical changes or flexibility in what the opposition has, the one thing that Critchley is wanting to stick to, at least to start a game, is a 4-2-3-1. So watch for those wing areas. And like I said earlier, if you're seeing changes on the fullbacks or changes to our attacking midfield in our wide areas, that could be a reason, something that Critchley is trying to gain an advantage on, that he thinks we have a better look by a certain player in those wide areas. Chicago operates out of a 4-2-3-1 or a 4-3-3. You'll probably see Chris Brady. You'll probably see, like we said, Andrew Gutman, central midfielders. Kellen Acosta's on their team. They've got Andre Franco. And he just joined Chicago this week. So it's going to be interesting to see how much time and how quickly he acclimates and gets a chance to play. He might not start, but watch out for Franco. He's a dangerous player, very creative, very adept. He's got good progressive passing. The attacking midfielders and wingers, I mentioned Zinkernagel. They've got Bamba, Gutierrez, Hugo Kuipers is going to lead the way, and that's a dangerous attack. As St. Louis looks to exploit some of these wide areas, or at least protect against the wide areas, Berhalter uses the wing play with fullbacks and wingers to create overloads. They had a 7-1 defeat of DC United earlier this year, where you could pinpoint the wide areas as the reason. Players stretch the opposition, creating space, opening things up, spreading out the defenses, leaving the central areas exposed. That's what Chicago is probably going to be doing first and foremost consistently against City, is trying to stretch their players out wide with the overloads, and then allow some of their better creative players to operate in space in the central areas to progress the ball up. And they do have the talent to be able to do that. So who we have and our capability of handling Chicago's overloads on the wings, and especially our 1v1 defending in the central area too, if that happens. So I talk about 1v1 defending in space on the wings. Well, if Chicago creates overloads and they're bringing 2 or 3 players in those areas at one time, St. Louis historically has had a propensity to overload a side and leaving a back post area exposed. That's going to be dangerous, and something St. Louis has to be mindful for is making sure that this zonal defense that they play, especially in their defensive third, is mindful of not letting a guy in behind them or get lost when these overloads kind of happen. Some of the stats that I think are important to follow against the Chicago Fire are, especially as it compares to St. Louis, I always talk about non-penalty expected goals, non-penalty goals minus expected goals, kind of looking to see how Chicago has been performing, how St. Louis has been performing relative to their XG. Have they been overperforming, underperforming? This gives us a little insight into not just the luck that they've been having, but in general, most teams regress if they're overperforming throughout the season, and I would say, what's the opposite of regress? Advance to the mean otherwise. And Critchley's team has advanced to the mean a little bit, but they're still poor. So looking at the stat, non-penalty goals minus expected goals. This is whether a team over or underperforms goals scored compared to their expected goals generated. Chicago has been overperforming. They are plus 5.3 goals scored compared to their expected goals. This is the 4th highest in the league. They have scored over 5 more goals than the underlying metrics say they should have over the course of the season, of their actual 47 goals scored this season. That speaks volumes to how effective they've been with converting their chances, but also, yeah, it's a little bit of a measure of luck in that regard too. But vice versa, St. Louis is the 2nd lowest team in MLS, 2nd worst when it comes to non-penalty goals minus expected goals, -9. That means complete opposite end. St. Louis has underperformed their expected goals by 9 goals. That's a pretty atrocious number. It's gotten a little worse, I think, or it's gotten better under Critchley in the sense that we've been able to score more goals, but we've still managed a pretty good XG clip. So we're kind of just chasing the dragon when it comes to trying to improve this based on how awful of a start we had with Olaf Melberg. The non-penalty expected goals difference in general is pretty similar between these two teams. So this looks at that first number, non-penalty expected goals, how many goals are you expected to score based on the chances generated in certain areas, volumes? Chicago only has 36.7 non-penalty expected goals in the run of play or corner kicks, free kicks. That's compared to 32 from St. Louis. That's just a 4.7 goal difference, when in reality, Chicago has 20 more goals than St. Louis, 47 to 22 overall. That's own goals, that's penalties, everything. That's a wild stat to me, is that in the run of play, free kicks, corner kicks, there's just a 4.7 goal difference as far as expected goals, but actual goals cumulatively is a 20 goal difference. That's crazy. So how are some of these passes happening? How is the field tilt for these two teams, and what can we expect from a control perspective? Well, Chicago doesn't like to control the ball in the final third as much. So this is going to be an interesting battle. In field tilt, which looks at, we know, passes into the final third, passes into the penalty area, passes inside the final third. We look at a few of these different stats to see that in passes into the final third, so that starts from outside, goes in, St. Louis is averaging 24.1 per 90, and Chicago's averaging 27.5 per 90. Second to last and seventh to last. So neither team passes the ball into the final third with massive volume. Passes into the penalty area, though, when you get a little tighter to goal, St. Louis is averaging 8.28 per 90 and Chicago 7.36 per 90. That seems it seems close, but St. Louis is actually 15th in the entire league. So right in the middle in passes into the penalty area, volume-wise per 90. Chicago's 7th from last. So they're not making passes by and large in great volumes to get in. They do use a lot of the dribbling from outside in, getting some guys like Kuipers, like Gutierrez, Zinkernagel, like those players will dribble a little bit more and as they work the ball in from the wings. And then overall field tilt from these teams, because you take these couple metrics, you take passes within the final third, and you look at overall field tilt in the past 3 games for Chicago. They have lost the field tilt battle in all 3 games. But if you notice, when I talk about their last 3, they have performed fairly well when it comes to this. 2 wins and 1 draw. So this tells me they don't need to win the field tilt battle in order to be effective and score goals. They're routinely getting outpassed into the final third and into the opposition box at a 2-to-1 ratio, but they've been able to win these games at a 49, 42, and 45% rate per each of those games. They don't need the volume because they're effective in the quality of their players and the quality of their shots when they get their chances. It's going to be a game where I'm fully expecting St. Louis to win the field tilt battle, because except for this game against Nashville where they had 28% of the field tilt, their last few games were 62, 62, 55, 54. This is a team that under David Critchley has prioritized winning the field tilt, getting the ball into the final third and creating chance after chance after chance and keeping the ball in the final third as much as possible, and then continuing to get the ball back into it as quick as possible. But compared to Chicago, they're okay with that. Chicago feels comfortable with their mid to low block defense, dropping back and then hitting you on the counter with these quick passes, high pressing if they need to. But often they use these interchanges. They use these defensive flexibilities very well to, I would say, confuse the opposition. And so with the exception of Nashville, City has wanted the overall field tilt. Chicago kind of invites that. Their style of play works well when they don't have high field tilt, and their record proves it. So the takeaway when it comes to the field tilt is that while St. Louis is more effective and would seem to hold an advantage in some of these, problem is Chicago wants that too. They're going to let them do it. They're not to say they're going to drop back and try to hit them on the counter all the time, but Chicago feels more comfortable, I would say, when they don't possess the ball a ton. They average less than 50% possession throughout the season. So they are smart with their overall possession, even if it's not in great volume. That's Berhalter's style. As we look to the pressing, Chicago has pressed more than St. Louis as far as defensive actions, height of defensive actions, and PPDA. The height of the defensive actions in the last, the average for the Chicago Fire, let's just say that. The average for the Chicago Fire is 39.7 meters from goal. Average for St. Louis is 35.1. So you don't really need to know like where exactly on the field. It's in the defensive third for both teams, but Chicago averages just slightly higher of a defensive position when they engage on the ball than St. Louis does. So if we've all been watching St. Louis matches, we know where they've been engaging under Critchley and otherwise. Chicago will look to hold a mid to low block, I think, a lot, block some of these passing lanes. And while St. Louis has been working to be more compact and hit on the counter, pressing from a mid block, I think you're going to see a tightness, a compactness in Chicago, especially on specific sides of the field as they look to retake the ball and then create those overloads on the wide areas. So that's my breakdown of the Chicago Fire. If you want to ping us on social media at FlyoverFooty, at Matt Baker STL, love to dig into anything else you might have. I think that's about it for us on the wind down. Beyond that, I really echo what we talked about in the starting 11. If we're going to see changes from Critchley's side from last week, they're going to be tactically motivated as far as personnel available. There's every reason in the world to think you stick with what you did last week because it worked so well. But at the same time, Nashville is not Chicago. I talked about the differences. Stu and I talked about the differences in central versus wide areas, the heights of engagement, the defensive postures. Very different team. And so, yes, you would be completely valid by saying, let's see the same starting 11 as we did last week because they're in form. They played well. But you could get caught into the problem of being inflexible against a different team, a different opponent. And when you have all this depth, when you have the health and the increased quality top to bottom that we do have now compared to earlier this season, you need to start taking some of those tactical changes, the differences into account. You don't want to let the opposition dictate what you do, but you can't not game plan for them as well. And if that means you sit Orozco and you play Wallem, then that's what it means. And that's what I'm going to assume if we see something like that happens. Now, if we see Kessler for Baumgartel, right-sided center backs aren't going to, in my opinion, change much with the opposition. Like they're both going to have the same role. That's a different story than with your fullbacks, with your midfield. So watch for that because these are different teams in their styles of play. And you may be at a point where sticking with the same lineup because it works and it is presumably your best 11 because they finally got a win. Maybe we start to get away from that. Maybe we use the Chicago game to show that we are more than just a team that figures out how to win in one game and just sticks with that roster until they figure out how to lose. I want to be more than that as a soccer team. I want St. Louis to be more adept at making changes proactively to force the issue a little bit better than that. And I do hope to see that. So not saying I'm going to be upset if I see the same lineup, but I just want the mindset behind the lineup to be more than these guys won last week. So let's let them ride it out this week. And interested in what all your opinions are once we put out our consensus starting 11. See, I can't even remember what it is. It's been a while since I've done this on Saturday. So I think that's it. Thank you for joining me on FlyoverFooty. I appreciate you sticking with me on the wind down. Enjoy the game. St. Louis, Chicago. Safe travels to everybody going up there. I know it's going to be a pretty good St. Louis crew going up to SeatGeek. Like I said, might be your last time going to Bridgeview with all the things happening. Soldier Field possibility for next season. The new stadium upcoming in a few years. And I'm really glad to be back on FlyoverFooty after missing a week or so. And excited for the rest of the season. I think there's a lot still to be excited for. And like I said earlier, we're coming off a 3-1 victory. If you can't be excited after a 3-1 victory, even with everything that's going on, then maybe you need some kind of a little attitude adjustment. Like rethink about things. Allow yourself to be excited about a 3-1 victory against one of the best teams in the East and let that carry forward. There's no reason to think that we can't replicate this just because we haven't done it yet under David Critchley. So with that, I will say adieu and thank you for joining me on FlyoverFooty. Have a great match. Enjoy the match. Have a great trip. Enjoy it. Watch from home. And we'll talk to you later. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the night. Appreciate you joining me. And Stu, we'll talk to you later. Oh, Fallout on Sunday. I think it's going to be... here's a thing that's not going to be on the pod. If you're still with us, who was it? Somebody said at the very beginning, we made this joke. Ryan Biles made this joke that Phil and I have been, flying by each other in the night. You might get a Matt Phil Fallout this weekend. That's my tease. Have a great rest of the night, everybody. Talk to you later.